"I'm sorry, but our Platinum Parent-Teacher Association simply does not allow blue-collar workers. Perhaps your son would be much happier and less of a visual burden at the public school downtown." 5. Victoria Sterling's voice was as perfectly polished and utterly synthetic as the massive diamond resting on her left hand. She leaned against the hood of her pristine white G-Wagon, looking Elias up and down with an expression of undisguised revulsion. Her gaze dragged over his faded canvas work jacket, his scuffed Timberland boots, and the calluses on his dark hands, calculating his net worth to be slightly less than the tires on her SUV. "We maintain a very specific aesthetic at Oakbridge Academy, Elias. We are grooming future leaders here, not future laborers. I strongly suggest you withdraw him before the board does it for you." Welcome back to the channel. If you crave stories where arrogant, entitled bullies are utterly destroyed by the quiet giants they underestimate, you have found your home. Before we dive into the rest of this story, let us know in the comments which city or country you're watching from today. Now, let's get back to the revenge. Elias stood in the crisp morning air of the Oakbridge Academy drop-off zone, his expression completely unreadable. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He merely adjusted his grip on a small, dented, vintage metal lunchbox holding his 8-year-old son's sandwich. Elias was a black single father raising a bright, deeply empathetic boy named Malik. What Victoria, the school's ruthless PTA president, failed to realize was that Elias's work boots weren't a sign of a struggling handyman. Elias wore them out of habit and profound respect for his roots. 20 years ago, he had started as an independent contractor swinging a hammer 12 hours a day. Today, he was the anonymous founder and sole owner of a multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate empire. He owned the skylines of 3 major cities, but Elias despised the hollow, performative wealth of the elite. When his wife had passed away from a sudden illness 4 years prior, he had sworn to raise Malik with the grounding reality of hard work, humility, and character. He wanted Malik to understand that a man's worth was built, not bought. Oakbridge Academy was supposed to be the best academic institution in the state, which was the only reason Elias tolerated the suffocating, toxic atmosphere of its wealthy parents. From the very first day, Elias and Malik were treated like charity cases. The other parents, clad in designer labels, would visibly tighten their circles when Elias walked by. They whispered behind their manicured hands, complaining to the administration that Malik's presence somehow diluted the prestige of their bloodlines. Elias endured the microaggressions in absolute silence. He swallowed the burning indignity every time a teacher spoke to him with slow, condescending patience, as if his dark skin and canvas jacket made him intellectually deficient. His anchor through this daily humiliation was the small, dented metal lunchbox. It had a faded, peeling sticker of a vintage rocket ship on the front. It had been his late wife's lunchbox when she was a little girl, and Malik carried it every single day like a sacred artifact. When the other kids mocked it, flashing their expensive, temperature-controlled bento boxes, Elias would sit with Malik on the front porch at night, tapping the dented metal. "This has history, little man," Elias would whisper, his heart aching as he saw the confusion in his son's eyes. Real strength doesn't need to be shiny. It just needs to be solid. Elias bore the sneers of Victoria Sterling and her sycophants because he believed in quiet endurance. He believed that holding his head high in the face of prejudice was the best lesson he could teach his son. But Elias's patience was not infinite, and Victoria was blindly walking toward a tripwire she couldn't even comprehend. The quiet endurance was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. The escalation had been building for weeks, orchestrated primarily by Victoria's son, Julian, a spoiled, cruel boy who mirrored his mother's absolute entitlement. Julian had made it his personal mission to torment Malik, mocking his clothes, his hair, and, specifically, the vintage metal lunchbox. Elias had taught Malik to walk away, to be the bigger person, and Malik had tried. But bullies rarely respect boundaries, and the administration at Oakbridge had a notorious habit of looking the other way when the aggressor's family donated heavily to the annual fund. The breaking point occurred in the cafeteria. Julian, flanked by his wealthy friends, cornered Malik at a lunch table. According to the cafeteria staff who later whispered the truth, Julian had demanded Malik hand over his trash lunchbox. When Malik quietly refused, clutching the metal box to his chest, Julian grabbed it and threw it across the room. The metal hit the tiled floor with a loud, sickening crack, the hinges popping loose and the faded rocket ship sticker tearing against the grout. Malik, seeing the last physical connection to his mother violated, finally stood up and shoved Julian backward. Julian tripped over his own expensive sneakers, falling and scraping his knee. Within an hour, Elias was summoned to the principal's office. He walked in to find Principal Hastings, a weak, sweating man whose primary job was appeasing wealthy donors, sitting behind his desk. Victoria Sterling was already there, pacing the room in a furious, theatrical rage, her designer heels stabbing the carpet. Julian was sitting in a chair, holding a completely unnecessary ice pack to a microscopic scratch on his knee, looking highly entertained. Malik was sitting quietly in the corner, tears silently tracking down his cheeks, holding the broken pieces of his mother's metal lunchbox in his lap. "This is exactly what I warned you about, Hastings." Victoria shrieked the moment Elias stepped through the door. "These people are violent. They are uncultured. That boy is a physical threat to my son and the entire student body. I want him expelled, immediately. Or I will pull my family's funding and organize a mass withdrawal of the Platinum PTA." Hastings wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, looking at Elias with a mixture of pity and cowardice. "Elias, I understand children squabble, but Julian is the victim of an unprovoked physical assault. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. Given Malik's background and the concerns already raised by the board regarding his fit within our community, I have no choice but to initiate expulsion proceedings. The paperwork will be finalized at the emergency PTA board meeting this Thursday." Elias didn't look at Victoria. He didn't look at the sweating principal. He looked at his son. He saw the devastation in Malik's eyes, the profound, crushing injustice of a sweet boy being punished for defending his mother's memory while his wealthy abuser smirked. Elias walked over to Malik, knelt down, and gently took the broken pieces of the metal lunchbox. The sharp edge cut slightly into Elias's thumb, drawing a single drop of blood. He wiped it away, placing the broken pieces carefully into his jacket pocket. The silent, enduring father died in that office. The billionaire apex predator woke up. Elias stood up, his face devoid of any emotion, his eyes as cold and deep as a winter ocean. "Is that your final decision, Hastings?" Elias asked, his voice low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. "It is," Victoria interjected, stepping forward with a victorious, venomous smile. "Pack your bags, Elias. You and your violent little brat are done here. Get out of my school." Elias looked at her for 3 long seconds. "Your school," he repeated softly. He took Malik's hand. "Come on, Malik, we have work to do." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He walked out of the office, the gears of a massive financial guillotine already beginning to turn in his mind. Elias did not go back to a construction site. He put Malik in the back of his understated sedan, drove to a private, heavily secured skyscraper downtown, and rode the private elevator to the penthouse suite of Vanguard Holdings. He walked into his massive, glass-walled office, the broken pieces of the metal lunchbox still in his pocket. He picked up his secure phone and dialed his lead acquisitions attorney, a ruthless corporate shark named Arthur. "Arthur," Elias said, staring out at the city skyline he practically owned, "I need you to execute the Oakbridge Academy contingency, immediately." Oakbridge Academy was prestigious, but it was also horribly mismanaged. Months ago, out of a quiet desire to protect the institution his son attended, Elias had instructed Vanguard Holdings to silently purchase the massive, high-interest balloon debt the school owed to a private equity firm. The school's administration had no idea that their $10 million mortgage had been sold to a faceless holding company. Furthermore, Elias had already begun the process of legally purchasing the very land the historic academy sat upon, moving the deeds into a blind trust he fully controlled. "The debt is fully mature, sir," Arthur's voice crackled through the speaker. "They missed their quarterly restructuring payment 2 weeks ago because their PTA funding fell short. You have the legal right to call the entire $10 million note due within 24 hours. If they default, you assume total ownership of the assets, the board seats, and the operational licenses." "Call it in," Elias ordered, his voice cold and precise. "File the default notices with the state. Transfer the land deeds out of the blind trust and into my name directly. Draft termination papers for Principal Hastings for gross negligence, and draft expulsion orders for Julian Sterling. Have a security detail and our full legal team meet me at the Oakbridge Auditorium on Thursday evening at 6. Thursday evening arrived with a suffocating, self-righteous tension in the Oakbridge Auditorium. The emergency PTA meeting had drawn 50 of the wealthiest parents in the city. Victoria Sterling was at the podium, dressed in a stunning designer gown, delivering a passionate, thinly veiled racist speech about protecting the pedigree and safety of the academy from outside, undesirable elements. Principal Hastings sat behind her on the stage, nodding nervously. They were just about to vote on Malik's formal expulsion when the heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. The hushed murmurs died instantly. Elias walked down the center aisle. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing his faded canvas jacket and his scuffed work boots. But this time, he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 6 high-powered corporate litigators in immaculate bespoke suits, carrying thick leather briefcases, and 2 massive private security contractors. The sheer, overwhelming aura of absolute authority radiating from Elias sucked the oxygen out of the massive room. Victoria gripped the podium, her face flushing with indignation. "What is the meaning of this? Security! Remove this man immediately! You have no right to be here, Elias!" Elias walked directly to the front of the stage, his legal team fanning out behind him. Arthur, the lead attorney, calmly walked up the steps, bypassed Victoria completely, and handed a thick stack of legal documents to a pale, trembling Principal Hastings. "Actually, Victoria, I have every right," Elias said. He didn't use a microphone, but his deep, resonant voice carried to every corner of the silent auditorium. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, Vanguard Holdings executed a total default clause on Oakbridge Academy's $10 million operational debt. Seeing as the board is entirely insolvent, the holding company has assumed total ownership of this institution. Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, dropping it onto the stage at Victoria's feet. "Furthermore, the ground you are currently standing on was transferred into my personal name this morning. I don't just go to this school, Victoria. I own it." Victoria's jaw dropped. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. The wealthy parents in the audience gasped, a collective wave of shock rippling through the designer-clad crowd. Hastings dropped the legal documents, his hands shaking violently as he read the termination clause on the first page. You're lying," Victoria stammered, her voice cracking, her arrogant facade crumbling into pure, unadulterated panic. You're a construction worker." "I am a builder," Elias corrected coldly, "and right now I am demolishing a toxic foundation. Hastings, you are terminated, effective immediately, for gross negligence and enabling abuse. Security will escort you to your office to clean out your desk." Elias slowly turned his gaze back to Victoria, his eyes narrowing. "And, Victoria, as the sole owner of this private institution, I reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who violates our new zero-tolerance policy for bullying and discrimination. Your son, Julian, is permanently expelled, and you are permanently banned from stepping foot on my property ever again." 6 months later, Oakbridge Academy was a vastly different place. The pretentious, exclusionary policies of the old board had been eradicated. Elias had completely restructured the admissions process, introducing a massive scholarship program that brought in brilliant children from diverse, working-class backgrounds. The school's academic rating had skyrocketed, and the atmosphere was no longer toxic. It was vibrant, inclusive, and genuinely focused on education. Elias sat on the new board of directors, but he still drove his understated sedan, and he still wore his work boots to the meetings. Malik was thriving, surrounded by real friends who valued him for his kindness and his mind. The karmic retribution that had fallen upon Victoria Sterling was as swift as it was brutal. The public humiliation in the auditorium had been recorded by several parents and leaked to the elite social circles of the city. Victoria's reputation was instantly incinerated. The wealthy elite, desperate to maintain their own proximity to Elias's newly revealed astronomical wealth, treated Victoria like a leper. Her husband's boutique investment firm lost half its clients in a month when Elias's holding company publicly blacklisted them. Worse still, Julian was rejected from every other elite private school in the state. No headmaster wanted to risk angering the billionaire who had casually bought and conquered Oakbridge overnight. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Elias was sitting in his downtown executive office when his assistant buzzed in, her voice laced with confusion. "Mr. Thorne, there is a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's crying and refusing to leave the lobby. A Ms. Victoria Sterling." Elias sighed, putting down his pen. "Send her in." The woman who walked into his office was a ghost of the arrogant PTA president who had sneered at him months ago. Victoria was drenched from the rain, her hair frizzy, wearing a plain trench coat that looked completely devoid of designer labels. She looked exhausted, humbled, and deeply desperate. She stood in front of Elias's massive mahogany desk, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "Elias," Victoria choked out, tears spilling down her pale cheeks. "Please, I am begging you. Julian has been sitting at home for 6 months. No school will take him. My husband is on the verge of bankruptcy. Our friends have abandoned us. I know I was cruel. I know I was wrong. I will get on my knees right now and apologize to you and Malik. Just please, make a call, lift the blacklist, let Julian back into Oakbridge, please." He looked at the weeping woman, feeling absolutely no anger but equally no pity. Actions had consequences, and Victoria had spent her entire adult life insulating herself from them with money. Now, the bill had come due. Elias slowly opened his desk drawer. He reached inside and pulled out the vintage, dented metal lunchbox. He had taken it to a master metalsmith who had painstakingly repaired the hinges, welded the cracks, and sealed the faded rocket ship sticker under a protective clear coat. It wasn't perfect. The scars were still visible, but it was whole again, solid and unbreakable. Elias placed the metal lunchbox gently onto the center of his desk. He looked Victoria dead in the eyes, his voice steady and calm. "You broke something that couldn't simply be bought," Elias said quietly. "You tried to break my son's spirit because you thought your money made you untouchable. You are not apologizing because you are sorry, Victoria. You are apologizing because you lost." Elias picked up his pen, turning his attention back to his paperwork. "The expulsion stands. My security will show you out." Victoria let out a shattered, quiet sob. She realized in that terrifying moment that all her wealth, all her connections, and all her arrogant posturing meant absolutely nothing in the face of a man who had built his empire from the dirt up. She turned and walked out of the office, disappearing into the cold, rainy city, a forgotten relic of a toxic era. Sometimes the most profound power doesn't need to scream to be heard. It simply waits in the shadows, letting the arrogant build their own glass houses right before dropping the stone. Thank you so much for watching. If you loved seeing this entitled bully get exactly what she deserved, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share the video with someone who appreciates a flawless victory. Until next time, stay humble, protect your peace, and never judge a book by its cover.